Hey Shell Point, John High, Academy Manager, back with you again to introduce this next session we have for you with Professor Adrian Kerr. This session is Thailand, History and Culture, Part 2. I hope you will continue to enjoy Professor Kerr as he speaks again here in our Academy. Professor Kerr, take it away.
Hello again, Shell Point. It's nice to be back again doing our online delivery of, in this case, Part 2 of the history of Thailand. Last time we spoke about the history and background to the area we call Thailand or Siam. This time we're going to talk more about the culture, the people, and what you see when you go to Thailand as a tourist. And I mention that because Bangkok is the most visited of all the cities in the world from the point of view of tourism. So, what does Bangkok look like? It is, of course, surrounded by rivers and canals, and they're called klongs. So here you see a very busy market, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, but this isn't set up for tourists. If you look carefully in this picture, there are no tourists in this picture. This is where the good people of Bangkok come to buy their groceries on the canals called klangs, just to the west of downtown Bangkok today. Thailand is nearly always referred to as the land of smiles because Thai people are very cheerful, like Southern Indian people. No matter how poor they might be, they're nearly always smiling. And of course, one of the things that we have to remember when dealing with Thais is they hate losing face. So if you point out that there's an error in the directions that they gave you to get to the hotel, they take it very badly. And Arab people the same way. They don't like losing face. That's the only comment I'd make about the culture of Thai people. Very friendly, very approachable. How many? 65 million. It's about physically the same size as Texas, which has 28 million. So it's a fairly high population country, but it's grouped in a couple of big cities and then a large area of farming. Life expectancy is still relatively low compared to the West. Men only 70, women 74, which reflects the fact that most people in Thailand today are either farm laborers or now a growing group of them are working in factories. This is a traditional dress of Thai ladies. As you can see, the headdress is very similar to that of Laos and also Cambodia. As you can imagine, these people are very closely related both from religion point of view and culture. Of course, part of Bangkok goes back to the pre-automobile era, and you still see these folk who will very happily stop sleeping and give you a ride to where you want to go. The reason why the tricycle, or originally these were called tuk-tuks, but nowadays the tuk-tuks refer to the ones with engines, these are not so popular because most of the time this is a very high humidity, high rainfall, high temperature. The climate typically in the rainy season is like it is in Florida, 95 degrees Fahrenheit, 90% humidity, and it rains quite often. So the time to go to Thailand really is in the dry season, which is November to March. And so the tourists don't tend to use these because they'd rather have an air-conditioned cab. If you are very fortunate and you can afford one of these wonderful hotels which are on either side of the river, you have all the finest names of hotels in the world based there, and they provide a wonderful, not taxi service, but a water taxi service. And this taxi service goes up and down the river and it stops off at each of the major piers, so you can in fact not have to get challenged by the very busy roads of Bangkok if you want to move up and down to the tourist centres from your hotel by using this water taxi. It's a very relaxed, charming way of moving up and down Bangkok. The ladies are always in a good mood to sell you things, and as you're going up and down the river, they'll come across your boat and they'll offer to sell you water and all manner of goods as you're heading towards the tourist centres. Sadly, half of the country is based on rice rice cultivation, which has not changed in 3,000 years. And as you know, to actually grow rice, you have to have a paddy field, which is a mud-soaked, flooded field. As you can see, this farmer is up to his knees in mud, and you plant the rice seedlings in this wet environment, and you do that as a back-breaking work. As you can see, you're bent over double all day during daylight hours, and then eventually you have to cut the rice and capture the seeds and turn it into rice. As you can imagine, where they use animals to do the work of flattening the fields, they still do so. This is the famous water buffalo, and this is a wonderful picture I saw where this young boy doesn't go to school. His job is to look after the water buffalo for his father and mother, who are rice farmers, and that was taken about 3 years ago. Not only do you have to plant the rice and bend over double, but the time comes to harvest it, and you have to go in with your sickle and start cutting down by hand. And sadly, this is nearly always the job of the females in the family. Last time I was in Thailand, I actually saw a mini combine harvester. It was the size of a small car, not like the giant ones in North America. And I asked him, where did he get the money from? He said, well, the proceeds for 1 year's farming went to buy this mini combine harvester, but it meant that he could cover a lot of ground when harvest time came. And more of these mini combine harvesters are beginning to appear in Cambodia and in Thailand and in Burma. Oddities. The Christian missionaries did very, very well in these Southeast Asian countries. In terms of conversion to Christianity, not huge in terms of percentages, you know, because Thailand's 95% Buddhist, but nevertheless there are churches spread all over Thailand, and this is the one that amuses me most because this is dedicated to St. Anne, and this rather gaudy concrete structure is built over a port access area, and it's dedicated to Mary and her mother, built in 2009. And guess what? This whole church and this statue is dedicated to the patron saint of sailors and fishermen. And one day a ship came along, didn't put on its brakes, and hit the jetty, and the statue came tumbling down. So there you go. The city of the capital of Thailand today, Bangkok, is a relatively new one. It didn't exist before the late 18th century. As I mentioned, Rama I moved his capital city from the middle and the north of Thailand to a safer area in the south. And he brought with him some link to the past, the Ayutthaya, which had been turned into a ruin. So the bricks from that were robbed and brought into the palace area. So you can see some very interesting 600-year-old brick structures in the, not structures that are new, but the actual building materials came from a much earlier civilization. The top picture was taken in 1860. Very simple, small town, and nowadays, of course, it's become wealthier, and you can see the extensive roofing structure has been made, and also more of the stupas, and we'll go through some of these stupas in a moment. But the nice thing about Bangkok is it's based on the river, so it's very beautiful when you come in on your boat taxi. Most of these buildings are relatively modern, and I'll take you through these three, which are the very largest structures in the capital area of Bangkok. On the left is the Corn Cob, which is the old Hindu structure, Mount Meru, and that's the Pantheon Temple. The second spiky one in the middle is the Ayutthaya Library, which was moved down, and in there the treasured Tripitaka, which are the books that were written about Buddha when he was trying to reach enlightenment. And then the very new one, in the middle of the 19th century, sometimes they're called chedis or stupas, and this was built in 1855. And every stupa in the Buddhist world, the curator will tell you that at the bottom of the foundations there is a piece of Buddha. So it'll be a finger bone, it'll be a tooth, piece of hair, even a piece of skin. Of course, we all know that Buddha never left the Ganges plain, and so you have to take all this with a pinch of salt. And the curators of this particular gold stupa claim that the breastbone of the Buddha lies at the bottom of the foundations. It's fairly large, it's 270 feet high. It's dwarfed by the largest of the temples in Southeast Asia, which is Shwedagon in Burma, in Rangoon. The thing to remember, these are practicing religious institutions. So when I take people on a guided tour, I always remind them the day before that, ladies, please cover your shoulders and your legs down to your ankles. And gents the same, actually. Shorts are not welcome. You're not allowed to go into the core area of the royal palace in shorts. They'll give you a type of sarong to wear. And if you haven't brought one with you, they will rent them to you. But the trouble is, it takes about 45 minutes to queue up to get these things, so it's best to take them with you. This is one of the most beautiful of the structures inside the royal palace area. The bot here just means the house of. So this is the house of the Emerald Buddha. And there's a couple of things to look at. The beautiful gold finials. And if you look at the top of the finial, you'll see a bird. This bird is the Garuda. In Hindu religion, each of the major gods, Shiva, Vishnu, so on, they had their own vehicles. It would be a bull or some form of animal that is mythical. And this one was the Garuda, and that is a large albatross-type bird, and that lines the finials of only royal pavilions. So if you see that Garuda there at the very top, it's like a large stork or albatross, you know that this is a royal house. In fact, the Indonesian national airline is called Garuda, and this is their symbol too. This rather scary-looking person is a yakshas, or demon, and they are there to protect what's inside. And inside is the Emerald Buddha, which is probably the most significant manufactured item in the whole of Thailand. It is really important to the culture and the religion and the luck of Thailand. And so that's why we have these large 12-foot-high demons to protect the Emerald Buddha, which is inside, which we're going to go into next. On the way into the staircase, you also have a second layer of protection, and this in Thai is called an apsoni or apsonsi, which is the name of a golden angel. In fact, all the way through Hindu religion, you have these mythical creatures, which in Cambodia are called apsaras. In Thailand they're called apsonsis, and they are there to tempt you into bad habits. And this is a test, if you like, before you go into a religious establishment, to get all your unclean thoughts out of the way before you enter for spiritual enlightenment. And these ladies are everywhere, from Burma to Cambodia to Thailand, all with slightly different headdresses and different names, but they're fundamentally the same people who are trying to tempt you. Inside, it's very dark and very crowded, and you can't use flash photography and you can't use telephoto lens. So it's really tricky to get a clear picture like this. You have to get up very early in the morning to get a tourist-free picture. And this is the famous Emerald Buddha. Bad news, folks, it's not made out of emerald, it's made out of jade. But it's green, and it's only small, 26 inches high, so it's about this height. The mythical story is that in 1432, precisely, this statue was being moved around when some plaster fell off, and underneath they found that there was the Emerald Buddha. And so the Laotians stole it, and then Rama I stole it back again and set it up in his new capital city. This is really a part of the Thai DNA, because this is the embodiment of good luck or protection of the Thai people, and they take it very, very seriously. So 3 times a year, the king himself, no less, will come to the Emerald Buddha bot, and he will change his clothes. So depending on whether it's summer heat or height of the summer rainy season or the cold winter, relatively speaking, he will change the decoration of the clothing of the Emerald Buddha, and it's covered on national television, and if it's not done properly, then it brings bad luck to the Thai people and the country for the next year. So 3 times a year you can actually see the king, if you're lucky, changing the clothes of the Emerald Buddha. On the way out, you'll see, by Western eyes, a rather gaudy modern mural, and is made in the 1820s and is continually being cleaned up and restored. You can see how good condition this is in. It's been totally repainted in the last 5 years. And those of you who study Hindu religion will know that the gods of India manifest themselves in many different avatars or forms. And the form of Vishnu that's very popular is Rama. And this is the story of the Lord Rama. And it's called, in India it's called the Ramayana, and in Thailand it's called the Ramakien. And it's 178 panels long, and it represents the actual story of Rama, of how he had a brother, and his the king's girlfriend to be wife was stolen by the evil king of Lanka, and the monkey Hanuman saved the day and won the battle, and so his wife was returned to him. And it's the longest commonly shown theatre production in the Southeast Asia and India. And every 2 years or so, a new movie will be made, and the movie goes on for 5 hours. And so it's really a big event. And the Ramayana is an embodiment of the old Hindu gods, which spreads now throughout Southeast Asia. And there it is in the middle of a Buddhist country in Bangkok. This is where the king lives. It was built in 1868 and looks very old style, but you can see that lower down you're using very modern Western style structures. There are 9 working parts of this temple, including this, which is the fanciest, the throne hall. But because it's a working institution, it's closed to the public, so we can just walk around. The most exciting thing, as far as I'm concerned, is the building which houses the reclining Buddha. As I mentioned in the first part, there are lots of reclining Buddhas in Thailand, but this is probably the prettiest. And just to explain the difference in the position of the Buddha, if you see the Buddha like this, where he's leaning on his hand, then that means he's meditating. If you see him with his head on the ground, that means he's about to enter nirvana and he's about to die. So this is the reclining Buddha in Bangkok, which is coated in gold leaf. This is not solid gold, as you can imagine. It's 155 feet long and it's about 3 stories high. The tragedy is, although they built this wonderful building to protect it from rainfall, it's so narrow that you can't get a proper picture. You cannot get a picture of the whole of the Buddha in your frame, as I tried many, many times. The interesting thing where I'm standing with my camera is the feet of the Buddha, because if you ever want to check whether a person claims to be a Buddha, whether it's true or not, you simply ask him to take his socks off and look at his feet. And any true Buddha will have certain motifs on the feet of the individual. That's the theory. And of course, all reclining Buddhas, in mother of pearl in this case, will have some of the signs that you can tell this individual really is a Buddha. This is the famous Bodhi tree, which is supposed to be, if you listen to the curator, a cutting from the Bodhi tree that I mentioned in the first part, where the Buddha stayed for all those nights and days wondering about how to become enlightened. And this tree is the same type of tree, it's a fig tree, but who knows whether in fact it's related to the tree that the Buddha actually sat under. But it's considered very, very holy. As you can see, people bring sacrifices here and money and gold to this Bodhi tree. Those of you who like massage will know, of course, the Thai school of massage. And in 1800, roughly, this building was built inside the Royal Palace area, where hints were given to where the massage point should be. So each of these drawings represent sensitive areas of the body where you can alleviate pressure and stress through massage. And it's still a college where people go today to learn how to do proper massage, Thai massage. One of the prettiest of the other Buddhas, of which there are many in the Royal Palace area, is this bronze Buddha, which allegedly was taken from Ayutthaya to avoid the invaders capturing it. And underneath, allegedly, again, Rama I's ashes are placed. And this is the oldest temple in the area of the King's Palace today. One of the prettiest, I think, is the monastery itself, which is next door. There are 1,000 Buddhas all lined up, all almost identical, although only 400 are actually gilt. Sadly, when they built these, the plinths that they sat on were made out of wood, and then they were restored with plaster. As you can see, they're very highly painted, but the 2 nearest me had just been finished being restored. They constantly have to restore these because the wood rots and the plaster falls off, but this was the day in which they just unveiled these last 2 Buddhas, which have been polished nicely, and their plinths have been repainted. So they are very, very attractive, and you can walk around the outside area and count up 400, and every face is allegedly different if you're prepared to take the time. The Wat Po Monastery is a working monastery, which many tourists forget. And so they'll go up to the monks when they're studying and ask them for selfies and sign this. So that's very disrespectful. There are 300 monks who are practicing their religion as the tourists walk by. In Thai culture, all boys have to attend a monastery at some time. They don't have to stay as a monk, but they have to do many months of study into Buddhism, and they wear these wonderful saffron robes. Just a comment about the color of monks' robes in Buddhism. They vary from state to state and variety of Buddhism. So, for instance, you'll see them with a claret-colored robe if they come from Tibet. The Dalai Lama, as you know, is always wearing a claret-colored robe. Some are bright yellow, some are orangey yellow. So it depends which variety of Buddhism the particular sect belongs to. Of course, if you're a proper Buddhist monk, you don't do any work because you're studying Buddhism and you're trying to reach enlightenment, and therefore you depend on handouts. And the handouts can either be in money, but more often are food. And so every day they'll put their begging bowl out, as the Buddha did himself, and they will eat whatever's given to them. They can't be picky, so they can't order fried chicken one day. They have to just take what they're given. And, even worse than that, you can only eat between sunrise and noon. You cannot eat until it goes dark. But they've changed the rules that because of the humidity, you're allowed to drink sodas and water after noon, but no food. And here lies a dilemma, in that these monks don't do very much physical activity, and over the last 15 or 20 years, like many people in the West, they've become larger and larger and larger until a study was done of the nearly 350,000 monks who are practicing in monasteries throughout Thailand. Half are actually technically obese. And diabetes is now becoming a major issue for these monks. So in 2017, the ruling Supreme Council of Buddhism in Thailand declared the Health Charter, and they ironically called it the middle way, which Buddha followed, of course, and they said there's a middle way in all things, including food. And so these large monks are now encouraged to walk rather than take tuk-tuks. They're expected to do some work like cleaning temples. They're given nutrition advice as to what foods are healthy. And if you can't get yourself in good shape, then please wear a thick belt so the tourists don't see it. That's the state of the eightfold chin issue currently raging through the Thai monasteries. One of the most beautiful things to see, if you've got the timing right, in the dry season is the 25th of November. An old Lavo concept, back to the old days of 2,000 years ago almost. The Lavo people had this tradition of setting forward paper kites and with little burners underneath, usually candles. It goes back to Indian times even, and it's once a year. The sky is full at night with these beautiful rising illuminated devices, and the idea is that as they're rising, you let them go, then you think about your personal issues and try and wash away demons and negativity, and concentrate on the flames themselves from the candles, which is a symbol of venerating the Buddha himself. And it's a wonderful event, which in fact is becoming more widespread. It's now almost becoming a de rigueur tourist event in many countries in Southeast Asia, and in fact in India too. This is the prettiest temple by far, and the most magnificent in terms of its size, and also not hemmed in by other buildings in Bangkok. And if you go at dawn or sunset, as I've done here, you can see a beautiful sunrise or sunset, the lights just coming up, the illumination is still effective on the main prang there, the corn cob at the top and the subsidiary prangs at the bottom. The idea of this is it's supposed to represent where the land of the gods live. If you remember, Olympia was where the Greek gods lived, and they came down to look at humans and mix with them. Well, this is where the Hindu gods lived, in Mount Meru. So this tall structure is supposed to represent Mount Meru, and it's dedicated to Aruna, the Hindu god of the dawn. Now, isn't it ironic that this is the most Buddhist country in the world, and yet their structures are still reflecting how once upon a time the Hindu religion dominated Southeast Asia? Well, I have to put a little bit of a negative comment, because although it's beautiful at night and the morning, when you go at daytime, it's pretty hideous. It's concrete and it's grey, and it doesn't look at all like this, so it's really disappointing. So try and see it at nighttime or dawn. One of the funny things about the weather in Bangkok in the summer, of course, like Florida, it rains in the afternoon every day, and you get some very interesting lightning effects. And this is the first time I'd ever seen horizontal lightning, and it actually shoots from left to right between the cloud layers. It's not uncommon in Southeast Asia, but it's the first time I had seen it in 2014. It's really odd, because we expect lightning to go up and down. Of course, if you're a tourist, you can't help but take something home, and there's no end of opportunity to buy knickknacks from the ever-present tourist stalls which line the river. As I mentioned before, if you're fortunate enough to be staying in a fancy hotel, then they will allow you to use free of charge the river taxis, and there are many piers up and down the river, and you can stop off, and this one is the Chang Pier, which is the most popular for tourists, and there's endless things that you can think about taking back home. Remember, everything that you see there is of very low quality and low value, and most of it's made in China, but don't tell the stall holders that. I think one of the nicest things to bring back, if you want to have a memento, are these wonderful wood carvings, and there's hundreds and hundreds of these, but you can either have them in pieces, where the three pieces join together on the wall, or a single piece, and they're rather attractive wooden images of the Buddha himself. And people often ask me, what's the significance of the long ears? And of course, on the left-hand side, you can see the typical long ear of the Buddha. Well, because he was a prince, he was wealthy, and in those days they didn't wear rings on the fingers, they had expensive gold earrings, and the more earrings you had, the longer the earlobes became. And so that was a sign of wealth, and that's why the Buddha is always shown as having long ears, because once upon a time he was a wealthy prince. The other feature of all Buddha statues and carvings are the ringlets. So his hair is always shown in little ringlets there, which is characteristic. My favorite by far is the Chang dried fish market, which smells fantastic. So you can imagine these fish have been sitting here for days probably, and the heat, no air conditioning, and you're expected to cough up and buy your dried fish. Quite a smell. The only time I've ever had quite such the concentration of rotting fish is when I lived in Bombay in India, where we lived next door to the port, and the fish came in and they stayed there and they stank the place out. But it brought me back to living in India all those years ago. Going back to the thing to visit if you're a tourist is to actually take a trip on the floating market, the Chou Phraya. As I said, this is not a tourist active site. This is purely for the local people to do their business. But you can go along and watch from the bridges, and it's a wonderful sight to see. Now, food. Well, there are hamburger restaurants and fast food chicken places, but the Southeast Asians, as you know if you visited, have a great interest in crickets or locusts or spiders. And we look in horror as somebody will tuck into a nice fried cricket dinner, sometimes in breadcrumbs, sometimes in batter. And people say to me, why are people in Southeast Asia eating crickets? And it's very simple. If you are a poor farmer and you've got a limited amount of grain, what do you do with the grain to produce protein? You can feed it to a cow, and that'll take 5 years to produce a steak, or a goat, or a chicken. But if you actually give it to insects, they produce protein very quickly and use the minimum amount of grain to produce a fixed amount of protein. So if you're a poor farmer, then this is the best use of food, giving it to an insect, and then you eat the protein from the insect. Hard for us to swallow, don't you think? Of course, if you don't like crickets or locusts, what about a nice deep-fried spider? I can't beat it. Now, we all love coffee, and one of the strongest, most interesting coffees in Southeast Asia is the civet coffee. And the civet is a sort of a cat-like creature, a bit like a polecat, and these creatures are trained to pick out the juiciest of the coffee berries. So they'll either live in trees and pick them out naturally, or they'll be handed a big basket full of coffee berries. And the idea is that civet, who's got a very good nose for taste, will actually choose the very, very sweetest, best coffee berries, and he digests them. And then you collect his droppings, and you roast those droppings, and that makes civet coffee. And it costs $1,500 a pound. For those people brave enough to drink it, they say it is wonderful, but you have to remember where it came from. White elephants, what's all that about? Well, a white elephant is just an albino elephant, and there are so many produced every year in Thailand. And the tradition is that when Buddha was born, the first thing he saw when he opened his eyes was a white elephant. And so it's always been a tradition of spiritual enlightenment of some form. So it was that the albino elephants, the white elephants, well, they're not really white, they're more a pinky, tawny color. Here's one on the left-hand side. they are not allowed to become ill, they're not allowed to work, and they're certainly not allowed to die. So they are very expensive, useless creatures for the rest of their lives. And so it was that the king decided, how can I punish somebody I don't like? Why don't I give him a perishing white elephant where he'll have to look after it, feed it, he can't make it work until it dies, which is like 60 or 70 years. So the white elephant, the name comes from giving this gift, which seems like a gift, but it's not, it's a curse, to somebody you don't like. Well, the king of Thailand thought he would make friends with the American president, Abraham Lincoln, and he sent him a telegram saying, I would like to send a white elephant to you to look after. And Abraham Lincoln got his best diplomats to write a polite declining message back to him. So Abraham Lincoln did never get his white elephant. Many of you will have read about the disappearance of the infamous Jim Thompson, who may or may not have been a spy, a CIA agent, but he lived in Bangkok and he was a great supporter of the Bangkok and the Thai culture. So during the Vietnam period, he was very good at going around the country, finding old buildings that he's disassembled, and then he re-erected in his gardens, which are in the center of Bangkok today. He supported the dead art of silk weaving, and it's thanks to him that the silk weaving and dyeing industry in Thailand is alive and well, because he supported it. There are 6 houses which he reconstructed, all made out of teak, and a wonderful collection of antique miscellany from all around parts of Thailand. The curious thing was that he went for a walk in the Malay hills in the south of Thailand in 1967, and he was never seen again. Neither his body or himself were ever seen again. And there's all sorts of suspicious stories that nefarious people bumped him off, but it's all theory. Now we're going to move towards the end of this presentation by talking about some of the new treasures that have been put on show in Bangkok. And this is the most famous of them, the Golden Buddha. The Golden Buddha had a temple built round him in 2010, and it's an attempt by the Thai government to spread the interest of tourists away from the main part of downtown, which is the royal family housing area. And the story goes that this rather boring Buddha was covered in plaster, and it was sitting in a warehouse. Nobody knows where it came from, but it was being moved out of the warehouse when it was dropped. And when it dropped, a large piece of plaster fell off, and it wasn't a plaster Buddha, it was a solid gold Buddha in 1955. It's 13 feet high. It's the largest gold item on this planet, if you believe it's made out of solid gold. It would weigh 5.5 tons, and allegedly it's 18 karat gold. It's the highest value item, religious item in the world. The story goes, and beware of moldy old legends because there's no way to check them, that it goes back to the early capital city of the Thais in the 13th century. And it was covered in plaster during the invasion of the 16th century by the Burmese, and then people forgot about it. Not sure I fall for that one. I spent way too many minutes wandering around the Golden Buddha when it was first put on display to see if it was solid or whether in fact it was gold foil or gold plated, and it's really hard to tell. But of course the Thai government will never allow anybody to weigh it or do a full analysis, so we'll have to believe them it's a solid gold Buddha. But where do you put such a valuable item? And they built this. Now at first glance this looks like a very nice 1900 or 19th century early Bangkok temple, but we all know this is only 9 years old, so it's modern concrete with a bit of marble on the top, and right at the very top is the Golden Buddha, and it's become all of a sudden, the last 5 or 6 years, one of the most popular tourist sites to visit. Further out of town, usually not on the tourist route, is this Muang Boran Disney World. It's 500 enlightened buildings, all grouped together by a Mercedes dealer who bought a golf course and built these mini versions of the Thai structures. Southeast of Bangkok, and they're all historic Thai buildings going back 1,500 years, and it's a very interesting place in miniature. It's a bit like a Madura Dam in The Hague in Holland, where they reconstructed The Hague as it was in miniature. West of Bangkok is the oldest town surviving in Thailand, which is Nakhon Pathom, the original capital city of southern Thailand, and it possesses the tallest spire on top of a stupa. And you can see here very clearly the structure of the stupa is indeed an upside-down begging bowl with a spire stuck on top. It's 417 feet high, and it's really ugly because it's made out of concrete. It's built in 1870. Although, again, the curator will tell you that underneath is the foundations and part of the Buddha are under that stupa. Now, those of you who are dragon lovers and watch the Game of Thrones are wondering what happened in the last episode when Dragon got Khaleesi and flew out of view. Where did Dragon go? Well, I can tell you the answer. It went to Bangkok. And Dragon is alive and well, protecting this 17-story apartment building. And you can buy one of those apartments and live in the Game of Thrones forever. But watch out, because lots of his body cover the windows, so it's kind of dark. But there you go. Just to do a little bit of ecotourism, the most popular island nowadays in Thailand, in terms of New World thinking, is Koh Kud, which 20 years ago was an uninhabited jungle. And it's now been converted into an eco-tourist center. It has 2,000 residents, and it's become very popular because of its eco-friendly design, and also because it's never been part of the tsunami impact, and it's not really part of the cyclone area. So it's a protected area to the south of Thailand. Very pretty waterfalls, very well watered, and great place to swim. But the people who go there are actually going to get away from the modern hustle and bustle of Bangkok, which can be very, very tiring. It's one of the busiest, complicated tourist places to visit. It usually takes 2 hours to get from a cruise ship to the center of Bangkok, and you've got 2 or 3 hours, then you have to go back again. So a lot of people say, no, I'm not going to do the Bangkok trip, I'll do something more relaxing. And these houses are available to rent by the week, and they're based on the Seychelles style of simple fishermen's villages on the water. If you book early, you can have a romantic dinner overlooking the Gulf for 2 in this dining pod. And you ask me, how do you get into this? And I will tell you later. This is a simple beach hut, which you can hire much more simply, but it's no air conditioning, and so you have to pick your time of going. There are some issues in Thailand, as you know, and the biggest issue that Thailand has, apart from the military government versus democracy, is in the north of the country, the area of poppy growing is out of control. Those of you who study heroin use and abuse and opium and so on will know that the 2 biggest areas of poppy cultivation in the world are the Golden Crescent, which is fundamentally part of Pakistan, but mostly Afghanistan. And now, because the United States withdrawing from Afghanistan, the poppy farmers are on fire, and they have produced more poppy, opium, and therefore heroin than have done in the last 20 years. So that is a very big source of barbiturates and heroin and fentanyl type drugs. The other area is further east, called the Golden Triangle, and there the area of where Burma and Thailand and Laos meets on the right-hand side there is where it's so far away from the military governments of those 3 countries that they have managed to create a haven for poppy growing, and this is the 2nd largest generator of opium and therefore heroin. It became so unruly that the United Nations were brought in to try and keep peace, but it's an ongoing struggle in the north, and not an area that you want to visit as a tourist. Likewise, jihad and Islam fundamentalism has raised its ugly head. In 2012, this tragedy took place on the Malay border. As you know, Malaya is not a Buddhist country. It is, in fact, an Islamic country. And, of course, some of the fundamentalist terrorists want to try and promote Islam in the countries nearby. So Bali was attacked for the same reason, and so was the south part of Thailand. Thailand today is a very modern, thriving, successful, and relatively wealthy country. It is the manufacturing capital of Southeast Asia. 1/3 of the wealth of Thailand comes from manufacturing. It's no longer totally dependent on rice harvesting. Well-known names which now have set up factories in Thailand, in the southern part of the country particularly, near the airport and near the port, of course, and near the capital city. Ford assemble cars, Yamaha, Triumph, most of Triumph motorcycles are assembled in Bangkok. BMW are following suit. Honda likewise. Harley Davidson has a assembly plant there. Michelin make tires there. Ricoh copiers, of course. Power tools. Toshiba are present, and Rolls-Royce even are assembled in outer areas of Bangkok. So very, very important part of their GDP is manufacturing. But of course, they're in competition with the other countries in Southeast Asia. And you can see that a number of other countries are much cheaper. And Thailand has actually leveraged itself up because of its growing wages. It's now typically equivalent to $3,000, as is Malaysia. But Indonesia, the average wage is a third of that, for instance. And the Philippines, likewise, and Vietnam, the same way. And India, the southern part of India, it's a fifth. The wages for the people who work in the same industries in southern India is a fifth of what the Thai wages are. Now, many of them are not skilled, and so far Western companies have not yet moved in to the same extent. But Thailand has now almost leveraged itself into a position where they're not as competitive as the countries around about. And so I leave you that thought, but I would recommend that if you do want to go to Bangkok in Thailand, very easy to get to. Many international flights go into Singapore or Malaysia or Thailand itself. Difficulty with visiting a place like Thailand or any country in Southeast Asia is you have to assume you'll be traveling from America for about 26 hours. In maybe 2 or 3 hops, but 26 hours and the other side of the world can be demanding on your body in terms of jet lag. But it's well worth the trip, and the Thai people are wonderful, and I wish you the very best. Take care. See you soon.